Welcome, everyone. I'm Ana Maria Velica, and I'm your host today. Welcome to our supply chain talk. We have a beautiful topic very close to my heart, delivering on the social in your ESG strategy. And I have beautiful guests, which I invite on our stage. But before we do that, I would like first to welcome the audience. As you know, we are broadcasting live on LinkedIn. We are broadcasting also via Reporter. For those who registered for our episode via Business Reporter website, you get to have the full episode experience. You can interact with our panelists, and you can also get this beautiful mug for the best comment or best compliment, why not? So I would like to invite my first guest, Rachel Locke. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome to our supply chain talk. A few words about Rachel. Rachel is head of supply chain sustainability and ESG, UK for DNV. Throughout her career, Rachel has worked with private sector companies, governments, and civil society to understanding supply chain constraints and the different roles of value chain actors in addressing supply chain risks, such as labor and human rights issues. She has worked extensively in sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East and Asia, at production and manufacturing sites, conducting human rights due diligence and working with companies to develop comprehensive strategies to address, manage, mitigate, and remediate supply chain risks. An amazing expertise, really. I'm really excited about this panel discussion. My second guest is a good friend of mine, someone I worked with in the past, Solène Ledigabel. If you can unmute yourself.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello, Solène. A few words about Solène. Solène Ledigabel currently works in the civil service for the Department for Business and Trade, where she holds the role of commercial business partner. She has a solid background in marketing and advertising procurement that she gained in working for blue chip organizations such as Sky and Nestle. And a funny anecdote, she even was once my manager at Nestle, where we met. So, and I have many other anecdotes, but I will keep them for other episodes. Solène, welcome to our supply chain talk again. Last but not least, we have also my beautiful friend, Anne Daly. Hello, Anne.
Hello.
Anne Daly is a global procurement leader specializing in indirect and marketing procurement for FMCG and pharma. And also Anne Daly is an amazing people leader. I know that because I worked with Anne, and Anne made my life simpler when I joined Nestle. And yeah, now it's public, Anne. And also, Anne, a funny anecdote, Anne started growing vegetables during the COVID lockdown, and now is enjoying watching them grow. Amazing.
And eating them.
Amazing. Yeah, it's very healthy. Super. So, as you see, I'm also passionate about hosting this panel because I'm a full supporter and a passionate supporter of women in leadership in supply chain. So I'm thrilled to host this debate, which is on one of the most important, I would say, pillar of ESG. And just for the audience, as a reminder for all of us, as its core, ESG is about human rights and equity, and it's policies and actions that impact individuals, group, and society. So it's about laws, it's about good practices, and we will debate in this round table. And as you know, we have a news item, and I would invite my panelists to debate and to share their views. It's a shocking, very shocking news, which was broadcasted by BBC. It's about McDonald's and supermarkets failed to spot slavery. And the news item talks about 16 victims who were forced to work by a six-family gang. And what's even shocking when you read that news, it's about how big companies, corporations like McDonald's and also retailers in the UK, for many years, they failed at spotting the signs. So this is just open for discussion. I would invite you, Rachel. What do you think about the news item?
Thank you. Yes. I mean, I think it's so important that topics like this are getting media coverage, especially when it is in a country like the UK. We are sometimes guilty of believing that these things are not possible in our world, in our country, and unfortunately, they are prevalent. So I think it's really, really good to see it getting that media space. What I would take away though is there was a sense that lots of companies had come forward saying, well, we exited the relationship, we found signs and we exited. And actually, I think it's important to note that whilst, of course, removing the risk from your workforce, from your supply chain is important, just walking away doesn't fix the problem. And actually, the issue here is that many firms had engaged, had walked away, but the problem persisted. So, a key takeaway from me there is that a company's responsibility isn't just to identify and then remove the risk, it's also to act and respond on that risk. And I think that's something that perhaps was not presented so well in the article. And then the other thing I would just say is that I think there was also a lot of talk about due diligence or sort of audits or assessing. And similarly, I think this has to go beyond that. And this has to be about moral obligation. And it's not just about doing a due diligence exercise and sort of accepting the results and findings.
Yes, Rachel, thank you. This is a really good point, moral obligation. And I would like to see more corporations. I would be thrilled to learn that somewhere in the background, the CEO of McDonald's in the UK is watching to us, because this is an invite to all companies, small or big, to moral obligations. They have a moral obligation. What's your takeaway, Solen, when you read that?
Yeah,
news?
I mean, very similarly to Rachel, I thought that you would always kind of imagine modern slavery as being something very sophisticated, something that would be hardly noticeable, and that would kind of get in the modern society, certainly in the UK, you would kind of think this is a very kind of hard thing to detect. And when I read the article, I mean, there were kind of obvious signs, and over a long period of time, which should have or could have alerted alerted McDonald's and the company on the fact that the HR process hadn't actually picked up something important. And you always, I suppose, like it was the first kind of comment I make to myself, is like, you imagine this to be very hidden, very difficult to detect, and yet actually modern slavery is actually sometimes very obvious. And we almost gone so far in developing very sophisticated tools to detect modern slavery that we miss some obvious signs of it. So sometimes staying on the basics and kind of having basic checkpoints can also be a very effective tool to detect those kind of misconducts.
Exactly, Solen, especially that it was going on for many years. So it's not like 1 year and okay, I have an excuse. For so long, for several years. Anne, what's your view?
I agree with Rachel and Solen. There's a moral obligation, and if it doesn't look right, if you have any questions, as an employee, as somebody who is meeting with the supplier or seeing something, then, you know, don't just walk away from it. Think about it, raise your hand, raise the flag, because sometimes it's better to over communicate and ask one question too many than not to ask enough questions. I think what's also frightening is the fact we're talking about the developed world, we're talking about the UK, we're talking about Western Europe. There was also a case in the US over a year ago, contract manufacturing, employing underage children, and they were working on factory lines along with other people. This went on also for quite a while, until it was raised by the media again, and and a number of HR issues, a number of things that could have been seen, that questions. So apparently these people were forging documents to make them appear to be older. But again, if it doesn't look right, ask those questions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I wouldn't agree more with what you said. It's even shocking that this has happened in the UK, in the modern world, where we have the Modern Slavery Act introduced by Theresa May. Yeah. So UK is perceived as, leading its way. And I have some statistics. London remains a central hub for modern slavery in the UK, with a 12.6 increase in cases over the past 3 years, according to the Met Police. So this is shocking. So what we are discussing and debating, it's really serious, and I hope many leaders will go away and think about obligation, moral obligation. It's about law, complying with the law, but also it's happening. You need to do properly the audits. You need to take the due diligence, and you need to take it seriously.
Yes, sorry, Susie, and I just Anne's comment kind of made me think of something. We're talking about due diligence, we're talking about having the right checks, but Anne, you're saying, surely someone's heard or has had an intuition or has had some sort of suspicion. I think it's also empowering your organization at every step of the ladder, at every level, to kind of raise their voice when they have those kind of doubts or those kind of questions. Modern slavery is not, we're talking about, duty of care and, moral duty. And it's not just a topic for, a specific team in an organization or a specific level of roles. I suppose, it should be really a practice all throughout your organization, and people should be empowered to kind of voice their concerns. So I think you're right, and I wonder if all the employees from McDonald's were interviewed, maybe we'd find one or two who said, we did feel something was fishy, but maybe we didn't say anything.
Yeah. Exactly. And Celine, to that point, what's really, really important is training. So companies to train not just supply chain and procurement colleagues, but to obviously to have a higher level of training and examples and a database for supply chain and procurement colleagues, but to train everybody across the organization on what this could look like and what to watch out for, and what not to accept in discussions with any suppliers that they may be talking to.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anne. I think we could make maybe our producer, we can influence her to have another session, another supply chain talk on this topic. I would like to reiterate, we have, if you registered for this episode, for the talk show via the website, you need to open the chat box in order to interact with the panelists and with us. Let's go into the first topic of the discussion, because this under the social pillar, there are lots of deliverables. We just picked on one of the most critical one, complying with human rights. What about diversity, equity, and inclusion? And as a woman, who has been doing leadership roles in a male-dominated world, I can tell it was painful to be the exception at the table. So I'm very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I would like us to start the round table about promoting diversity and inclusion through fair labor practices. Rachel, what's your how in your career, what's your view about promoting diversity and inclusion through fair labor practices?
Yeah, I mean, I think this also builds on a previous point around training and education and awareness. And I think that this is something that also you have to make sure that people understand what this means and what this means in practice, and that this isn't just another tick box exercise, a compliance exercise, and that people understand what some of the constraints may be, and that they are able to then look at labour practices through that lens and make sure that everything is set up, managed, monitored, responded to in a way that promotes these fair labour practices. I also think that there's a strong element of companies really having to believe in this being beneficial, and again, not just seeing it as a compliance exercise. I think that slightly leads to a later point we'll talk about in terms of social impact and how you measure and monitor that. It has to be led from that tone from the top, really sort of through the ethos and culture of every organization.
And in order to live it, you need to have lived experience, and we need very diverse board of directors if you want to instill that, feel for what diversity truly brings to the table, because it brings profit. It brings diversity of, of opinion. It brings innovation, but you need the right diverse board of director in order to understand how important is diversity. Yes, Solène.
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, I mean, Rachel, I obviously thoroughly agree with what you've just said, but there was just one thing where, you say obviously it needs to come from within. They need to kind of believe that, there's some good interest for them to look at their pool of people through more of a diverse lens. Having said that, I do think, being involved in lots of procurement, and certainly within the civil service, this is something that we pay a particular attention to. But I also think there is a responsibility when you're in procurement and when you are kind of procuring services, and I mean goods or services, that you ask your suppliers to think about that. So it's all well and good if they've thought about it themselves and if they're already kind of convinced about it, but there's a responsibility where we in procurement can change the market as well. We can tell them, listen, we are looking at that. We want you to tell us how many more women there's going to be in your board over the course of the contract. Give us a number of how many there are now, and then we'll monitor in year 1, in year 2, and in year 3. Show us how you're kind of progressing on those topics. So there's also, it's a push and a pull. So I think there's a responsibility for authorities and and companies in their procurement practice to also kind of push their suppliers a little bit on those topics, to make to show that this is important now in the world, and in the world of things being considered, it is going to make a difference to their bids. It is going to make a difference if they actually embrace that challenge. So I feel like there's a bit of both.
I like it. I like the procurement lenses because you are talking about the procurement due diligence, and I think we all agree procurement plays a crucial role in focusing on selecting suppliers and partners based on the social value. And you reminded me of the times when we were doing the media pitch, and all other pitches where Nestle was so keen on the social media, and we were asking suppliers literally very specific indicators, fair labor practices they should meet in order to be selected for the next Anne, what's your What's your view?
I totally agree with Rachel and Solène. I think it very basically it starts at the hiring process. So, you know, what the hiring processes do our suppliers do our own companies and do our suppliers have in place? And then when it comes to any RFX, as Solène was discussing, let's look at minorities. What, you know, how can we support minority companies, minority-owned companies, minority-run companies, or companies with a large percentage of minority, and not just women, but people with disabilities and you know, other minority groups. You know, how can we support them to ensure that they get visibility in a request for quotation or information, etc., process, that they have a fair chance of winning a bid.
And we are seeing more and more companies launching suppliers diversity programs and going outside to the world, telling and making it visible as a diverse 100% woman, you know, owning my own company. What are the chances for me to contract a corporate contract? Almost zero. I can tell you in 2 years, I haven't been able, and I come from the corporation. So I have the ability, I have the ethos, I know what they are asking for. Do I have a chance? Not even one chance. So I would really like to see, you know, the force for good, truly big corporations really accelerating the suppliers diversity. Is there anything else, Rachel, that in your practice have you seen as a good practice or as a learning in terms of promoting diversity and inclusion?
I wanted to build on the point around procurement and sort of encouraging this through the supplier base, and just caution the fact that this must also therefore not be seen as a cost, but as, I think the term Solène used quite rightly, as the social value, because sometimes there will be a cost to increasing diversity and inclusion within a workforce. Things like, it can be quite simple, like facilities, infrastructure, and, you know, making sure that access is there. And I think it kind of goes back to the point about educating procurement teams as well. But just broadly, if this is about social value, that then that is brought about through diversity and inclusion. And it just, I always caution that and this broadens to all fair labor practices actually, that companies don't always see it as an additional cost, and therefore, you know, suppliers get ruled out on that basis.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, agree with you, Rachel. And I think what an important point in that case is always to ensure that you've got a scorecard when you're looking at a number of different number of different suppliers, is to ensure that along with the quality, the delivery, the KPIs that you're looking for, that and price, obviously, that the social labor ESG aspect is part of that scorecard. And it has a weighting and a value that's intrinsic. Yeah.
Solène, I know now the Procurement Act is coming up. It was a bit delayed. I wonder, is it being delayed because they want to drill down in the social value more? Because it's super important. And I know for sure that, as you said, Anne, the public procurement will be publicly tendering, asking for at least a minimum of 10% social value. Is that correct, Solène?
Yeah, I believe social value remains at that kind of minimum of 10%. So it is a mandatory requirement across civil service, that 10% of the weight of the score that a supplier can achieve in a procurement is dedicated to social value. And I would recommend everyone to kind of type on Google socialvalue.gov and to actually see how many themes government kind of targets when it comes to social value. And there are a lot that are actually looking at certainly looking at the social aspects, and it can be either through, I know there's a well-being theme which kind of looks at how we collaborate with, or how our suppliers collaborate with communities. in that well-being themes, there'll also be things around, you know, how do our suppliers support their staff from a physical and physical health and mental health point of view. And there's obviously like a whole theme around equal opportunities that touches upon like in-work progression, diversity, minority groups. Also how to identify, you know, we can at the time of a procurement request suppliers to give their thoughts and the recommendation about how they're going to identify potential modern slavery. So that theme of modern slavery is actually within one of the things. So it's a very vast topic. It will still in the world of the new Procurement Act, it will still hold a very important place within the procurement, and it will have, I think, since the new Procurement Act, we look to kind of really increase transparency over anything that is done with the taxpayers' money, and rightly so. There will be an enhanced level of kind of notices and transparency that government will be able to give, and I'm sure lots of them around social values.
Thank you, Solène. This is becoming a masterclass, ladies and gentlemen. And we have a question from Rebecca, which I would like to direct it to Rachel. So, question from Rebecca: given that many global organizations and suppliers operate in regions with different cultural norms around gender equality, workers' rights and minority inclusion, how do you ensure your organization's values are upheld in these environments while still respecting local customs?
I think it's a really great question, and I sort of read it a few times thinking and changed my mind a little bit each time about the sort of response. So I'm probably going to say a couple of points, and there might be something in there. Firstly, I think it's quite important that we recognize here that this is not about any company imposing their values on their suppliers or in the countries where they're operating or sourcing from. So I think and that I'd say the same in any context. So I think we always have to respect the values of others, but at the same time, I think there is opportunity here where perhaps there are cultural norms or socioeconomic contexts where we believe we can have a positive impact, and we engage with local communities and they confirm as such. Then I think they can use their leverage in that to positively influence change through their values. I think quite often with these relationships, risk, values, conduct is outsourced through a code of conduct, and it's not explained, and it's not discussed, and it's not sort of adapted always. And I think this is where companies can actually, through that process of engagement, discussion, dialogue, and adaptations where it's required, they can strengthen those relationships and ultimately potentially drive more positive values in context where it's needed.
Lovely. Anne, anything to add
Rachel's
question?
Yeah, Rachel is very right. However, I would add one point, and that is when we talk about global organizations, when we talk about global supply chains, we're also looking at global standards. So the UN ESG goals, the ILO, and a number of different international organizations around labor and treating workers and employees fairly. So those should be respected. The very simple thing about no forced labor, so getting back to slavery, no child labor, fair remuneration, and the ability to at least have some collective coming together, whether it's a trade union or a workers' council, whatever. These are basics. And while every company should, to your point, Rachel, I totally agree with you, respect local values and customs, there are certain things which should be understood as the norms everywhere, especially for companies who wish to work across border.
Absolutely, and it's an incredibly important point. And if I can just build on it to say that the plus there is also, but they must make sure that it happens in practice and it isn't just something that's signed up to and an annex to a contract. I think this is where going beyond a commitment to or an alignment with or an agreement is so important to make sure that then does translate into practice.
Exactly. Great point, Rachel.
So how are we assessing social impacts and fostering positive relationships to create this sustainable future? So how are we assessing the impact? Solen, what do you think?
I mean, it might be the procurement speaking through me, but I think actually giving very kind of tangible targets, and sometimes recognizing and to kind of pick something that Anne or Rachel maybe said before, but recognizing that different suppliers will have different abilities in certainly from a procurement point of view, SMEs won't be able to give as much I suppose commitment than kind of larger corporations. Also realizing that sometimes it has a cost, so smaller suppliers can only invest into social up to a certain level. So with all those caveats, I think that there is a responsibility in evaluating fairly, as in the assessment of the impact of social can be done through very practical targets, and I mentioned earlier kind of cherry picking, simply asking at the start of your journey with a supplier, what do they do on this particular topic, where are they at, how many, if we take the topic of kind of diversity and maybe women in leadership, how many women do they have on their board, at the SLT, and kind of monitoring throughout the life of a contract, maybe how much they're doing that, trying to accompany them, trying to being extremely practical. So I think you can be pretty much kind of as sophisticated or as simple as you want, and I think it's all about tailoring your expectations maybe to the size or the capacity of the company you're looking at. But I think in terms of assessing the impact, data remains the most powerful way of looking at a supplier's or a company's progress.
Thank you, Solen. And I would say data is crucial, and also audits.
Yeah.
If we go on site and we audit a supplier, no data would beat what we see, what we experience, when we learn and we ask workers. I've recently been in Ankara visiting a supplier, and what I've seen on site, it was shocking. No health and safety rules, not even given, a basic training, have not seen any signs of health and safety in an industry which is really risky. So I was in shock, and we audited. We made a report. It wasn't an audit, it was a supplier visit, but we registered everything. So when we talk about social, I want us all to remind ourselves that we talk about health and safety. We talk about lives. We talk about working conditions. We talk about employee benefits. We talk about the impact on local communities. So with that in mind, Anne, what's your view on assessing social impact?
Yeah, so I totally agree with what you've said. Auditing is extremely important, and there are a number of ways of auditing officially. You can put it in your agreements that you will use an official auditor, be it anything from SADEX to SMETA to EcoVadis to whoever. But the most important thing, to your point, are the unannounced visits and the unannounced audits, because that is where you will really discover what is really happening. And it's shocking how much is going on the side of providing documents that look really good. Especially if you're doing a desk audit, you can get a load of documentation, but what is actually happening on the factory floor in the company, that is what's really important. And we talk a lot about factory type situations, but it also happens in office type situations. So, for example, the recent case in India of a young lady who died of overwork in a particular company, it was discovered afterwards that they did not have any proper permitted, as was normally requested by the government and their local authorities, working hour regulations. And since 2007, they haven't, I mean, so many years, they didn't comply. So it can happen, it can happen anywhere, in an office situation, in a factory situation. People need to, really look out for what is happening. If you're doing a regular supplier visit, also have your eyes and ears open. Yeah. And to your point, data is really important. The UK Act is coming up. There's an EU Due Diligence Act. There's a German, quite specific and quite stringent act. So data is going to become more and more important. It's probably, you're going to need a database. You're going to need, a platform in which all of the information is captured and seen over time to see what is happening and to Celine's point, where the improvements are taking place.
If I can build on that, sorry,
Yes,
Anna,
yes, Rachel, of course, yeah.
You gave an example where health and safety was poor, and and that is, of course, unfortunately, still the case in many companies. That said, I think if we look at where health and safety was across many industries 20, 30, 40 years ago, it has improved exponentially. And it has reached a point where there is good data. Companies are already using it to assess and drive performance, innovation, investment. And we often say to companies, when you're looking to then do this in, let's say, more broadly, labor, human rights, and there is a lot of crossover between the two, I completely agree. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are also a lot of things that we've learned from improving and implementing health and safety in companies that we can use in labor, human rights due diligence. And the most simple example I can give is for health and safety. There's often in a construction site, for example, you start the day with a toolbox talk, and it's things like incorporating information about workers' rights, worker welfare, and other topics in those talks can also help to shift the needle in this area. So I think it's really important not to always see this as something entirely new, but actually look at what we can learn from what we've already done in other areas.
Exactly, and it has been improved, and still there are certain areas, certain industries that have a lot to catch up with, in terms of health and safety, and to realize health and safety is not just ticking the box. It can cost lives in certain industries. So
I remember just to that point, and I remember an audit being carried out, and particularly, Rachel, a number of years ago, so things will have improved, where in the factory, the emergency fire escape doors were locked, and in another factory, there were a whole pile of boxes up against those doors. So if anything had happened, the employees would have had a very difficult time to get out in time. So these are simple things, but they need to be addressed.
Exactly. I would like us to go into the last topic of our panel discussion, because time flies quickly. Holding your suppliers accountable to mitigate social risks in the supply chain. Rachel, from your experience, can you give us an example on how, in your expertise, how did you do that?
This really comes, I sort of touched on it already, but it comes down to this really being a two-way relationship and not being a one-way transaction or a one-way request for information, data, reporting. And actually, if you invest in that relationship, that engagement with your suppliers, you're not only going to be in a stronger position to hold them to account, but you're going to have better visibility, you're going to have better understanding of the issues, the risks, what your role as a company could be in influencing, supporting, to some extent, of investing. As Celine said before, this is some of the progress that is needed is not cheap, unfortunately, and there's a lot of investment required to get the social performance up to speed. So yeah, I think we often work with companies who say, well, we request this information, we do this step, then we ask for this, we might do an unannounced audit, and all of those things are incredibly important, but there's so much more you can get from really knowing your supplier, engaging with them, and making them feel like a valued part of your supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about supplier relationship management, and to your point, Rachel, that this is key in that whole relationship circle. Absolutely, and coming back to your earlier point as well about not walking away from a supplier. If you see that the supplier is genuinely looking to improve, then why not work with them to ensure that they make that improvement? Now, if over time things don't really improve and it's been a lot of talk, okay, then obviously you can take a different decision. But to your earlier point, definitely sit down with that supplier and look with an action plan to see how they can improve, and then not just train our own employees internally, but also look to provide suppliers with training to help them as well.
I like that. Solen, what's your view on holding your suppliers accountable?
Yeah, I mean, I think to contribute to Rachel's point on the fact that it must be a two-way relationship, and it must be something that both parties kind of really truly discuss and have genuine kind of interest in driving. I think a good example that I have in a past organization is, I remember a contract. Immediately, it's not I've not seen or done that often, but I do remember once where we had agreed in the contract with the supplier that a proportion of the savings that they would achieve on the account would be dedicated in would kind of fund some of their social value contribution. So we were asking them to I mean, it was not around social, it was around sustainability, but sustainability still kind of was part of the social values. But we were asking them, we were really trying to challenge them on their sustainability practice. And but immediately it obviously costs money to do that. And we kind of decided that any savings that, not any savings, a proportion of the savings that they would kind of bring back would be given back to them. So it felt a bit like a full circle, but would be back to them as an investment into their ability to kind of strengthen their sustainability proposition. So I don't see why something I would love to kind of be able to do more of that, but that's where it is like a common interest. I mean, I think on the accountability, as I said before, and might repeat here, but at the time of a procurement, dedicating a percentage of the evaluation to count towards the social value element that you choose to incorporate in that procurement also shows to your suppliers that they can actually, that is going to make a difference. It is going to, it can change the outcome of the bid. If they score high on social values, that can be their way to differentiate and to kind of beat another one who wouldn't have done so well on social values. So showing them that it matters to win contracts, it matters to kind of think about those topics.
Thank you, Solen. Lots of ideas, lots of expertise at the table, because it's important also for companies to understand how they can hold their suppliers accountable. But let's do not forget, companies, they really need to lead their way. So walk the talk. So this is what they need to do. You cannot ask a supplier to do something if you are not already doing it. So this would be my invite to all the companies. One key takeaway: time flies quickly when we are having fun, and I would really like us as a roundtable, one key closing thought that you would like the audience to take away. Rachel.
Yeah, I think it's two questions to ask yourselves if looking at social performance. Why are you doing it? And will it really result in positive impacts? I think if companies can try and look at any initiatives in this space in that way, you're likely to have the greatest likelihood of success.
Start with the why. Yeah, I love that. Solen.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, key takeaway would be, data, and making sure that you drive also the topic of social value and the social element of the ESG through kind of monitoring data, challenging through data. And this also comes with, holding our suppliers accountable through KPIs. There is a way, KPIs are not just to kind of monitor how well they're doing in providing the services or the goods that the contract tells them to do. It's also about, driving those behavior. So certainly KPIs is a great way to also lead the way and make those transformations.
Thank you, Solen. One closing thought, Anne.
Agree with Solen on data. Apparently McKinsey say, if you're monitoring your suppliers well, you have twice less risk in this area. And the other thing is to anybody in a company where your colleagues and your CFO, where we're saying this is all too expensive, just remember how expensive it would be for your brand, for the company, for its reputation, if you could have avoided something that you could have seen earlier.
This is a beautiful closing thought, the reputation of the company and the importance of the social element. Yes, this is major, and we've seen it in the news and recently. Beautiful closing thought from my side is leadership. Just don't expect your partners, your customers, your upstream or downstream supply chain to display moral or best-in-class social behaviors if you are not already leading your way. I would like to thank you all for sharing your expertise. The way I would like to call it, it's like a masterclass, because it's so much experience that we are passing to our audience in a snapshot in 45 minutes. And it's incredible, and I would like to have you as guests again. Also, I would like to invite you to our show next Wednesday, the same time. The next episode is the future of drones in the supply chain. My colleague Alistair will host that. It's really cool about drones. Probably I will dial in to learn more about the drones. I know some companies are already doing this, business to business, business to consumer type of logistics using drones. So don't make sure that you don't miss that episode. And till then, I wish you a lovely rest of the day, and thank you all.